Hey class, welcome to week 4 of your Psych 323 class. This is just a brief overview of what's happening in your textbook this week, some of your assignments, and what's expected of you. So this won't be too long of a video, but just wanted to give you a little bit of an inside look. So to start, you are reading chapter 7 out of your textbook, and that has to do with communication. So this is communication pretty much in all different facets. So all different contexts with your friendships as you're growing up. Do you see more easily held communication between male to female? And then when do you start seeing differences in that, if at all, throughout childhood to adulthood? How do cultural elements impact that? Keep in mind that, throughout the entirety of this course, you're looking at not only gender within yourself as a person, but also where does that originate? Where does it come from? And what elements of your culture impact it? Because all of these things ultimately are a social construction, and that there's nothing wrong with that. That's just what kind of happens in society. We form norms, we form things that we expect people to hold to. And those norms are created by the majority. That's kind of the typical pattern of how things are normed. One element to keep in mind with that is that because we are humans, we are ever changing. Also within that, you have a wide variety of different types of people out there. So acceptance and expectance of difference should just occur. And I think as we've come into the last 100 years of civilizations, society, especially in the United States, this post-industrialized society over the last 100 years, we've seen a great bit of change. And that includes different people, different cultures, different acceptance of others. Not only that, but the rise of technology. We are aware of variety in the world because of that. We can literally go on our computer and see, holy crap, there's a totally different world out there. So because of that, we grow as a culture, we grow as a society. That is why in social sciences, one of the main manuals that psychologists and psychiatrists use is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And that manual changes. We've been through 5 different iterations, and that's because our society has changed. We are humans. We are changing. We are not an exact science. So I think that message in itself is something that I'd really like you all to keep in mind as you pursue through the next few weeks of this course. And I'm kind of going to hint on that in all my lectures, because the notion that gender is socially constructed, everything that you do impacts kind of these gender norms based, elements of culture, context, male to male, female to female, your expectations within your community. Those things are going to impact how you're expected to act based on your gender, or throughout your gender and across your gender, if that makes sense. Keep in mind too that if you have any questions about these things, because this is a lot of information packed into 8.5 short weeks, and I know that it's called coming at you fast, please do not hesitate to email. My door is always open. So kind of going into this specific chapter is thinking about gender and thinking about how we communicate with people of the same gender, same sex, or different gender, different sex. And you can intersplice those however you'd like. So essentially, we do see that young girls are more pro-social in their tendencies at a fairly young age. So you see them more interested in one-on-one type of interactions, and that's to have more of that kind of, intimate conversation with each other. So you're talking, playing with dolls, playing with, whatever little girls are playing with, and playing ball or something, and you end up having it just more than likely you'll see them in pairs of females, whereas and that's that pro-social kind of behavior. And you see little boys, they tend to do male to male a little bit later than girls, which is kind of interesting, or tend to prefer that. And you also see them have a tendency to have more egoistic type of dominance. And so that is a little bit more direct in communication, a little more forceful and kind of rowdy, I guess. So when you think about those elements, don't they kind of seem a little stereotypical, kind of like, oh, those are interesting. So you start to question, like, well, when kids are doing that and they're at a fairly young age, where does that originate? Throughout this whole journey of looking at gender, the main question that keeps coming back up is it learned? Is it nature? Is it nurture? You start to really start questioning that. And so really when you think about these young kids doing these behaviors, do you think it's still because their social learning has an impact on that? Is it still observed in their parents, and at 4, 5, 6 years old, they are mimicking their parents' behavior? Or is it more influenced by maybe natural hormones that are there? But sometimes you start to wonder, because those hormones really haven't escalated really till puberty. I mean, there are some before puberty, sure, but puberty is kind of when that hits, when you see more of that stereotypical behavior. So then how are the kids doing it at a younger age? So these are big questions that I think, you try to investigate and you try to answer based on your textbook. And so that's kind of the ongoing question that you're always looking at. One interesting thing, though, is that for young girls, they do tend to go female to female interaction, female to female communication throughout their school age. That seems to be more of a comfort zone. And what ends up happening is that same-sex play ends up becoming kind of reinforced and continues to be encouraged the more they do it, because they're just not getting exposure to anything outside of that. And because it keeps kind of their comfort, they don't go outside of that, it ends up almost reinforcing or kind of encouraging, exacerbating this stereotyped behavior, because their model is these other females. And so you do see that if you expose young girls to more sporting aspects and maybe young boys to more cultural aspects, that you get that mixed sex type of play, and it actually enforces it enforces less stereotyped behavior. So it does not enforce stereotyped behaviors. So again, kind of question, think about why that happens. Maybe it's exposure to this different type of behavior, this different type of social learning, peer learning of what is okay to act like. So I think that is definitely something to keep in mind as you think about your assignments for this week. A second big element that's in the textbook that I think is something to take note is this notion that group communication is going to be something that's unique based on whether you have males to males or male to female or female to female type of thing. And you do see that females tend to be a little bit more agreeable, whereas males tend to ask more questions. And when they actually get together, so the context is very interesting. When you have a male to female type of communication interaction, you're going to see that they are more kind of amenable to each other. There's more plasticity in their conversation. Whereas if it were more same sex, like males to males, it might go back to that origination of that kind of egoistic dominance. They're going to be a little bit more short, curt with each other. So there are some interesting expectations. I guess that's kind of the key part here, is what is expected of you? What do you perceive is expected of you by your peer group? And that is how you will act in that context. So kind of the next element that overlaps a little bit with that is the nonverbal communication. You do find that is always something that's happening. It's always going to be there, male to female, female to female, male to male. But you see that women are typically more, I don't want to, no offense guys, but it does seem like females are just a little bit more in tune with their nonverbal communication. Again, my automatic instinct is to go to, well, why? Where did they learn that? How did they learn that? Are women just natural investigators with their like little microscopes out? Are there, their little tools, and they're able to kind of figure out the nonverbal stuff super easier than guys? Like, no, there has to be some sort of an explanation of where that comes from. Again, you can go back to nature versus nurture. That's always going to be this underpinning idea of what has more effect. And really, you're kind of going to see that they both have a bit of an impact. But anyway, some nonverbal communication that's important to keep in mind is smiling, for example. Females are a little bit more kind of able to do that, ready to do that, wanting to do that. Same with gazing, so kind of that eye contact. Same with decoding. Decoding is the ability to interpret other people's emotions. So I'm conversing with somebody and I can kind of see that maybe they're like scratching their head, maybe they're like, they're just something's on their mind. You can just perceive it. Women have a tendency to be a little bit more empathetic. So that kind of goes along with that decoding. And then on this kind of a same idea is this notion of encoding, and that is the ability to understand one's own emotions. And that is a very important thing to consider when you think of how, again, I don't want to stereotype, but just for this conversation to generalize how young boys are taught to be raised, perhaps they're not encouraged to understand their own emotions as well as females are. How could this play into harming their potential romantic relationships down the road? How does this hurt them if they go into very stressful situations in their job, or if they get in trouble in a situation and they need to understand how they feel about it? I do feel like men are a little bit at a disadvantage with understanding how other people feel and how they feel, and really putting a label on it. So one kind of side tangent here, that is one thing that ends up happening a lot in therapy sessions, is being able to determine and label what your emotions are. You'd be surprised with how many folks are truly unable to say what they're feeling, when they're feeling it, and why. So that being said, I think it's also very important to understand that this nonverbal communication is not just a gender thing, but it's influenced by your culture. So, for example, gazing. Well, in the United States, you do see that more females will gaze. Well, let's look at a collectivist culture. Gazing and staring at somebody kind of is almost offensive. So you might see more females kind of looking away, looking down, they're avoiding eye contact. So I think culture makes a huge impact on those things. Same with religiosity, same with, different part of town, your social economic status, that might kind of play into somebody's ability when they smile. They might be considered as weak if they smile. So I think that's also something important to understand. And then lastly, one that's very interesting in how it gets interpreted and misinterpreted is touching. Think about sports contact. So that is very context dependent, as far as seeing that males can slap each other on the butt, and nobody thinks a thing about that. That's just expected in that particular context. So, and touching can mean multiple different things. So I think it's always important to have that kind of critical evaluative lens on what happened. Okay, well, why? How? Where? What's the context for a particular event, behavior, action, and communication? Lastly, I just want to mention this idea of leadership and different theories out there. This directly relates to your assignment for this week. So a couple different theories of leadership out there are the transactional leadership and transformational leadership. Just going to kind of leave that there for you. I want you all to explore both of those types. Try to look and do a little bit of research on which type of those leadership styles you think might be more in tune with a typical female, typical male. Again, I'm using typical in kind of the typical sense. and why? There's lots of other theories of leadership out there, so please, by all means, look through your textbook, use an example there, and also feel free to look through your SNHU library. There are some great resources in there. It's essentially like Google, but just a little more academic. Probably not as intuitive and quick, but it's academic, and all of the information in the articles are very empirically based and legitimate. So anyway, your assignments for this week: read chapter 7 and a couple different articles that are within your learning module. Your assignments are 4-1 discussion board. These are the different leadership studies. I want you to research them and define them, and just comment on them. Follow the instructions. Talk to your peers as well. And then assignment 4-2, which is a paper on communication between the genders. So essentially you're choosing a culture and you're thinking about the influences that contribute to different communication. Okay. I want to make sure that that paper is an APA formatting and it's backed up with references and citations. And think about how you can organize your paper, and that you want to paint a story about the topic, and you want to grab your reader by telling them what you're going to talk about. You're going to introduce them to the subject, and then you want to go into your high points about this paper. And you can organize that paper with headings. APA style is rather nice with how they do their level 2, 3, 4 headings. So I definitely take a look at apastyle.org to help you out a little bit with that. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I will see you guys after a bit. Take care.